6 years ago, I was working 60-hour weeks, convinced the exhaustion was just part of building something meaningful. But after years as a psychologist helping overwhelmed entrepreneurs, I know this. People who can walk away from goals that no longer fit them end up healthier and happier. The trick isn't to quit at the first hard moment, because the real skill is knowing which kind of hard you're facing. I'm going to walk you through 6 questions that separate productive friction from a goal that needs to change. Every entrepreneur I know has heard 2 messages that directly contradict each other. One voice says never give up, and another voice says know when to quit. The problem is that nobody actually teaches you how to tell the difference between healthy persistence and harmful stubbornness. And that dangerous gap is where a lot of people end up getting hurt. I want you to think about the last time you felt completely exhausted by your business. Maybe it was last week, or maybe it was this morning. You told yourself this is just what building something meaningful feels like, and you pushed through. But the exhaustion might not mean you're working hard. It might mean you're working hard at the wrong thing while your body tries to warn you. I know what that feels like, because about 4 years ago, I became very ill. I had cancer, and even after the remission, I needed a wheelchair for a long time because the cancer had affected the nerves in my lower back, so I couldn't walk very far and I can't drive until now. During that time, I had to completely stop working the way I had before, and I had to let go of goals that had defined me for years. That forced stopping taught me more about resilience than any amount of pushing ever did. The research on founder burnout is pretty sobering, and the numbers should get your attention. Depending on which study you look at, between 53 and 72% of founders report burnout symptoms in a given year. Around 73% experience what researchers call shadow burnout, which means they look fine on the outside, but they're running on empty inside. And nearly 72% of entrepreneurs struggle with at least one mental health issue. These aren't lazy people who gave up too easily. These are people who kept pushing because they thought persistence was the only virtue, and they paid for that belief with their health. One of the biggest drivers of this burnout isn't working too many hours, and that surprises a lot of people. It's what researchers call misdirected persistence, or grit without strategy, which means you keep applying effort to a goal or a method that isn't working because your brain is trapped by the sunk cost fallacy. You've already invested so much time and money and identity into this path that stopping feels like wasting everything. So you double down and your health pays the price. When I talk to overwhelmed entrepreneurs, I hear the same story over and over. They started a business because they wanted freedom and meaning, but now they're working harder than they ever did in a corporate job, and they're terrified that stopping or changing direction means they failed. That fear is exactly what the sunk cost fallacy feels like. It whispers that because you've invested years, you have to keep going, and it never whispers that those years are already gone and the only thing you can control is what you do next. This is especially dangerous for women who are running a business while also managing family caregiving. You don't have any margin left for wasted persistence. Every hour you spend pushing on the wrong thing is an hour you're not spending on your health, your relationships, or the parts of your business that actually move the needle. And that's exactly why you need a diagnostic tool instead of relying on your gut. The good news is that the research also shows a way out. One study found that founders who set clear work-life boundaries reported low burnout at 45%, compared to only 6% of founders who struggled to set boundaries. That is a massive difference, and it tells us that knowing when to stop isn't a personality flaw, it's a skill. So if our brains are wired to trap us, we need to understand what the science says about when persistence is healthy and when it's hurting us. The answer is more specific than you might expect. For decades, psychologists treated persistence as a character trait. You either had grit or you didn't. But newer research, especially from a psychologist named Carsten Roche and his colleagues, has completely changed how we think about this. They discovered that the ability to release unattainable goals and commit to new ones is a specific skill, and it's one of the strongest predictors of both mental and physical health. Here's what that means in plain language. When you pursue a goal, you encounter 2 completely different kinds of difficulty. The first kind is normal friction. This includes effort, boredom, frustration while you're learning, temporary setbacks, and anxiety at the edge of your competence. Researchers call these challenge stresses, and they actually improve your performance and help you grow. This is the healthy burn you feel when you're building a muscle or learning a new skill. It's uncomfortable, but it's temporary, and it leads somewhere. Think about learning to ride a bike or the first year of parenting, or launching a new product line that stretches your skills. You feel awkward, you make mistakes. Some days you wonder if you'll ever get it right. But underneath the discomfort, you can sense that you're getting better. The feedback loops are there. Your effort is producing results, even if they're smaller than you hoped. The second kind is what researchers call hindrance stressors. These are chronic obstacles that don't lead to growth. You see no progress despite sustained effort. Your health is deteriorating, your relationships are suffering, you're experiencing constant anxiety or depressive symptoms that don't get better even when you rest. This isn't friction that polishes you, it's friction that grinds you down. Maybe you've been trying to grow your business through a marketing channel that used to work but now brings in almost no leads. Or maybe you're offering a service that drains you but you keep doing it because a few clients still ask for it. Or maybe you're pursuing a business model that made sense 5 years ago, before you had children or before your industry shifted. The effort feels endless because the environment has changed, but you haven't. Roche's research found something striking. People who can disengage from unattainable goals show lower depressive symptoms and better biological markers, including lower inflammation. That's not a small finding. It means that holding on too long literally changes your body chemistry. On the flip side, people who find new meaningful goals after letting go of old ones report higher positive affect, more life satisfaction, and a deeper sense of purpose. So the research isn't telling you to become a quitter. It's telling you that redirecting your energy is biologically healthier than white-knuckling a path that isn't working. There's another body of research that's important here, and it's about escalation of commitment. This is the sunk cost trap in action. Studies show that people persist in failing courses of action mainly because of what they've already invested, not because of future prospects. Meta-analytic research finds that escalation is more likely when people feel personally responsible for the initial decision, when they've invested heavily already, and when outcomes are uncertain. As a founder, you check every single one of those boxes. You chose this path. You've poured years into it, and the future is always uncertain. That's why the sunk cost trap is so powerful for entrepreneurs. It doesn't just feel like losing money. It feels like losing a piece of your identity. If your primary reason for continuing is that you've put so much into this, or you're afraid of looking like a failure, that isn't grit. That's a cognitive bias, and it will keep you stuck. Even the researchers who study grit will tell you that perseverance is only beneficial when the goal is feasible, valued, and fits your broader life. Grit on a bad goal is not virtuous, it's just stubbornness with better branding. Decision scientists have added another layer. They recommend thinking in bets and using what they call kill criteria. You decide in advance which signals would mean it's time to change direction before you're in the emotional middle of the situation. That way you're making the decision with a clear head instead of waiting until you're exhausted and desperate. But knowing the theory isn't enough. You need a way to diagnose your own situation, and that's where the 6 questions come in. The 5th question is the one most people skip, and in my experience it's often the most important. So stay with me for that one. I'm going to give you a diagnostic tool you can use today. These 6 questions come directly from the research on goal adjustment, burnout, and entrepreneurial decision making. They're not a personality test, and there are no right answers. They're a way to check whether your actions fit your deeper intentions. Question 1 is about progress. Look back over the past 6 to 12 months. Have you seen trend improvements or credible positive signals? Maybe your skills are getting sharper, or you're gaining access to better opportunities, or your strategies are producing better results. If you can point to real progress, even slow progress, you're likely facing normal friction. But if your trends are flat or negative despite serious effort, and structural barriers are getting worse, that's a signal that the destination may need to change. For example, if you've been trying to build an online course for 18 months and your email list has grown from 50 to 200 people, that's slow progress, but it's still progress. The friction is normal. But if you've been at it for 18 months and your list is still at 50 because everyone who finds you bounces immediately, that's a structural signal. The destination, or at least the path to it, needs to change. Question 2 is about costs. I want you to make an honest inventory of the benefits and costs of your current path across every area of your life. What skills have you built? What networks have you gained? What internal satisfaction do you get? Now look at the costs. How is your sleep? Your stress levels, your relationships, your finances. If an outside observer looked at your trade-offs, they would probably say the costs are too high. When the ongoing costs to your health and your core relationships keep outweighing the benefits, and no adjustment seems to reduce those costs, that's a strong signal to reassess. I had a client who was spending 60 hours a week on a coaching business that brought in just enough money to cover her bills. She was proud of the work, but her marriage was strained. She couldn't remember the last time she slept through the night, and her doctor had warned her about her blood pressure. When we mapped her costs and benefits, the imbalance was staggering. She wasn't failing at business, she was succeeding at a model that required her to destroy herself. Question 3 is about motivation. Write down your main reasons for continuing on this path. Then label each one. Is it value-based, meaning it fits who you want to be and what you care about? Or is it fear-based, meaning you're driven by fear of regret, social comparison, or sunk costs? When fear and ego dominate your reasons, that's a cognitive bias signal, rather than evidence that the goal is still right for you. If your main reason for continuing is that you've already invested 5 years and you can't bear to waste them, that's a sunk cost talking. If you're mainly afraid your friends will think you failed, that's social comparison talking. But if this work genuinely matters to you and you can see how it helps people, that's value-based. That's worth the friction. Question 4 is about feelings. This one is simple but uncomfortable. Do you feel challenged but still curious, or do you feel trapped and numb? Normal friction comes with frustration, but it also comes with hope. Your negative emotions fluctuate. They respond to rest, support, and strategy changes. When you're facing a destination that needs to change, you feel emotionally depleted without a realistic path forward. Your thoughts become rigid. You start telling yourself this is the only path, or if this doesn't work, then nothing will. That rigidity is a warning sign. Pay attention to what happens when you take a real break. Not a working vacation where you check email every hour, but a genuine rest. If you come back feeling refreshed and ready to tackle the problem from a new angle, you're probably in normal friction. If you come back feeling the same dread you felt before you left, or worse, that's a signal. Question 5 is about identity fit, and this is the question most people skip. I warned you about this one earlier, and here it is. Does this goal still fit who you are becoming? Or is it an old self-stream that now requires you to suppress important parts of who you are? Maybe you started this business when you were single and had endless energy, but now you have children and different values. Maybe the industry has shifted and the work no longer matches your strengths. Maybe you built a service-based business because you loved working with people, but now you spend all your time on admin and you never see clients. Developmental research shows that life transitions often require recalibrating goals, and the people who can do that gracefully tend to have much better well-being. Question 6 is what I call the friend test. Imagine your closest friend came to you with the exact same situation. Same business, same numbers, same exhaustion, same doubts. You would probably tell her to make a change, and that advice applies to you too. This works because it bypasses your own cognitive bias. We're brilliant at rationalizing our own sunk costs, but we can see other people's situations with clarity. If you would tell your friend to step back, that is data you need to take seriously. Now, successful entrepreneurs don't rely on gut feelings for these decisions. They use written triggers and quarterly reviews. They set specific metrics in advance, like if month 1 retention stays below a certain threshold for 2 consecutive months, they explore alternatives. They differentiate between execution problems and strategic misfit. They run small experiments before committing to a big change. Some founders use a simple scorecard. They rate their business on retention, engagement, referrals, and sales clarity. If the total score falls in a certain range, they persist and focus. If it drops below that range, they run a small experiment with a new direction before making any big moves. You can do the same thing with your own goals. Write down your own kill criteria. Decide what would have to be true 6 months from now for you to keep going. And figure out what would have to be true for you to know it's time to change. Once you've asked these questions, you might realize the goal needs to change. That can feel terrifying. But here's what the research on what happens next reveals, and it's surprisingly hopeful. Stopping is not the same as failing. In psychology, there's a concept called goal re-engagement, and it's one of the most powerful predictors of long-term well-being. People who let go of goals that no longer fit them and then find new meaningful ones end up with more positive emotions, greater life satisfaction, and a deeper sense of purpose. This isn't theoretical. This is what the data shows across multiple studies. There's also something called rerouting psychology. Your brain is literally built to find alternative pathways when one route is blocked. Neuroscientists have mapped how neurons create alternative connections when original ones are damaged, and the same principle applies to your goals and your business. When one destination closes, your mind naturally starts searching for another. The question is whether you let that process happen consciously or you fight it until you break. In the startup world, the most successful pivots follow a pattern. The founders preserve their core mission while changing the product, the market, or the method. They stay committed but not attached. They understand that the thing they built was a vehicle for a deeper purpose. And when the vehicle stops working, they find a new one. That's not failure, that's adaptation, and it's exactly what resilient entrepreneurs do. Think about companies like Airbnb or Notion. In their early days, both struggled badly, but instead of abandoning their core insight, they persevered through the friction while paying attention to the signals. They refined their approach based on where they saw real engagement. They didn't quit at the first hard moment, but they also didn't blindly persist with a broken model. They used the friction as data. If you're considering a redirection, I want you to try something practical. Generate 3 to 5 alternative goals that draw on the skills and experience you've already built. Make sure they match your core values and have a healthier cost profile than what you're doing now. The research is clear that having credible alternative goals makes disengagement less distressing and more beneficial. You don't need to have the perfect next step figured out. You just need to know that other paths exist. The 3 stages of redirecting come from clinical neuropsychology, but they apply just as well to business. First, you stabilize and recover. You rest, you sleep, you repair the relationships that got neglected. You let your nervous system settle down from the chronic stress of pushing too hard. This stage isn't lazy, it's necessary. You can't make good decisions while you're running on adrenaline and fear. Second, you focus on your strengths and what researchers call compensation. You look at what you're genuinely good at, what you enjoy, and what the market actually needs. You don't have to start from scratch. You already have skills, networks, and experience. The question is how to recombine them into something that fits your current life. Third, you build new meaning and purpose. You create a goal that connects your strengths to something you care about. This might be a new business model, a new niche, a new product, or even a complete career change. The research shows that people who complete all 3 stages report not just less distress, but genuinely higher life satisfaction than before they made the change. Remember, the entrepreneurs who thrive long term are not the ones who never quit. They are the ones who know how to redirect their persistence toward goals that are feasible, valued, and matched to who they are becoming. That's the real skill, and it's available to you right now. Knowing when to stop pushing isn't a character flaw. It's a skill, and you now have 6 questions to guide you. If you want more on building resilience and managing stress as an entrepreneur, subscribe to the channel. Next week, we're talking about how to set the kind of boundaries that make this framework actually work in real life.